Hey everyone, welcome to Brian for Liberty. Thank you so much once again for stopping by. As usual, we're going to be talking about what are the Democrats and Republicans fighting about now. And really, the topic du jour seems to be voter fraud on mail-in ballots. So this is set to be one of the more contentious issues in the upcoming election. Donald Trump is drumming up fear about widespread fraud if mail-in voting is allowed. And the Democrat and left-leaning media are, of course, on the other side of the argument. So who's telling the truth? And as usual, when the Democrats and Republicans are fighting, whether it's COVID-19 or mail-in voting, the truth usually lies somewhere in the middle. And this is the case here. So when it comes to mail-in voting, in the current political climate, the question that I'm asking is, can our nation really stand a contested election? In the current political climate, with all the anger, I just don't see how a close election between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, when we're using mail-in voting, and neither one of these candidates is going to want to concede the race, is going to work for, spelling disaster. So Donald Trump is obviously fanning the flames of mail-in voter fraud ahead of the election, and he's getting both Republicans and Democrats ready for a fight in November. And with both sides clearly locked into their own little echo chambers, how can we believe that a peaceful resolution can be reached? And I believe this is something we're all going to need to be preparing for. But I just wanted to take a look at some of the facts, some of the media coverage of this, and how strange it all kind of looks from the neutral position of a libertarian like myself. And I'm going to start with the story. This is in the New York Times. And I think it's pretty clear where they land on this. And the headline is Facts About Mail-in Voting and Voter Fraud. And it starts out with President Trump has been baselessly warning that mail-in voting will lead to a rigged election. And I mean, that pretty much sums it up, right? Donald Trump is making baseless accusations about mail-in voter frauds. And to be clear, one of the accusations that Donald Trump is making is that foreign entities may interfere with the election, or, you know, it's Donald Trump. So there's always a lot of things going on. There's always a lot of things that he's saying. And I guess at the end of the day, there was no proof of Russians interfering with our elections either, but it didn't stop the Democrats. And I believe, to me, that's the point. In a contested close election, when you have mail-in voting and you have worries about mail-in voter fraud, I don't think either side is going to be willing to accept a loss. And I think even if you had a Joe Biden or a Donald Trump concede the race, I do believe that you're in for some violence and you're in for some real upheaval in this country, no matter what the results are in November. And I think mail-in voting in particular is going to add a lot of contention to the issue. So, which makes me wonder, why would Donald Trump right now be putting this issue front and center? We're a couple of months out. In the face of COVID-19, I really don't think there's any scenario where we are able to have an election without mail-in voting. I think you're looking at accusations of voter suppression. I think you are looking at accusations of putting the public health at risk. We saw what happened in Wisconsin, and I was part of that when the Republicans kind of put the Wisconsin election in a place where people had to go out to vote. I look at that and I say, the amount of anger and discontent throughout the country after that happened, we can only imagine what would happen in a national race where you have mail-in voting, you have accusations of mail-in voter fraud, you have a close and contested election. And so in 2012, though, it was none other than the New York Times that drew particular attention to the issue of mail-in ballots. And the headline from the New York Times in 2012 was "Error and Fraud at Issue as Absentee Voting Rises." And then if you look at this paragraph, yet votes cast by mail are less likely to be counted, more likely to be compromised, and more likely to be contested than those in a voting booth. Statistics show election officials reject almost 2% of ballots cast by mail, double the rate for in-person voting. Now, keep in mind the difference between absentee and mail-in voting. Absentee ballots have to actually be applied for. With mail-in voting, the ballot is made to the address of the registered voter. It's just mailed out. So the idea that there's not going to be issues with mail-in voting and the high potential for mail-in voting fraud, To me, I think that's a misnomer. I definitely think that there's a lot of potential here. I've already seen reports of people getting ballots for elections, not obviously the presidential election, but for other elections where they've gotten a ballot for somebody who doesn't live at the address anymore. And we're talking about on a grand scale, hundreds of millions of ballots being mailed out, and the potential for a large number of errors is significant. And you're talking about here, the New York Times itself saying that twice as many mail-in ballots are thrown out as in the voting booth. Now, the interesting thing, the argument that the Democrats are making, the argument that a lot of people are making is that it's a minuscule amount, that the instances of voter fraud are tiny. But we have to think about that in the context of a presidential election. We have to say, what is the variance? How much room for error do we have? Because nobody's going to care, or it's not going to impact the election is probably a better way to say it, if a few Republican votes or even a few Democrat votes don't get counted in California. Let's face it, California's going blue, right? It's not going to matter to a great extent if some Democrat votes or Republican votes don't get counted in Texas. We're talking about Michigan. We're talking about Pennsylvania. We're talking about Ohio. We're talking about districts that are highly competitive. We're talking about very small targeted areas. We're talking about areas where they went for Obama in 2012 and went for Trump in 2016, and the margins are incredibly narrow. If you lose twice as many votes in one of those small districts, you could flip an entire state. So we really have to be very careful about this, and we want to make sure that we're having the most secure possible elections. So to me, there are kind of two questions that play out here. And first, why are the New York Times and other major media outlets downplaying the possibility of issues with mail-in voting and mail-in voting fraud? I think that it's a reasonable concern to have. And why is Donald Trump speaking so adamantly about it this far ahead of the election itself? I think the first topic is pretty easy to decipher. The Democrats clearly believe that mail-in voting is going to give them an advantage over the Republicans, and they have reason to believe that. Historically high voter turnout favors Democrats, and it's pretty easy to paint any resistance to mail-in voting, any accusations of mail-in voting fraud by Trump as an attempt at voter suppression. His latest statement already drumming up fear and making the left assume the worst, that after the election, President Trump will have to be removed by force from the Oval Office. Now, I don't see that happening, but even the possibility of secession and civil war have been discussed among some circles. So the conversation is already starting to happen, and that should concern us all. It seems insane and downright impossible, but as divided as the nation is, a contested election could really spell disaster. And I definitely think that this election is going to be heavily contested. I think that there's going to be accusations of fraud on both sides. And I think we're going to have two candidates who are going to be very reticent to step back and concede the race. And I also think we have an American public that is not ready to accept either of these candidates. I think the far left and the far right are both absolutely convinced that they're going to win and are going to have a very difficult time accepting loss. So the second question is, why would Donald Trump bring this up in a way that's drawing so much attention? And really, if you think about it, he's making the Democrats dig their heels in on mail-in voting. And a lot of people on the left are saying it's because he knows he's going to lose, and he's already casting doubts in advance on the results of the election and preparing his base for a long fight to hold on to the White House. I actually don't believe that. And for Donald Trump, who has been so maligned so many times and then proven right about so many things he's said, to me, such an obvious motive seems out of character. So why would Donald Trump do this? Why would he cast so much doubt on the election ahead of the results? Obviously with all this polling and everything that's going on, and we're so far out from the race, and so there's so much other stuff going on. Why are we making this such an issue right now? And so I look at it, this recent survey that says 62% of people said they were afraid to share their political views. This is a Cato Institute study. I'll put it up on the screen here. It's a Cato Institute study, and 62% of people said they were afraid to share their political views. Now, who are these 62% of people? And let's be honest, who is Pitchfork Nation, right? Who's getting people fired? Who's coming for you? Who's demanding heads when they dig something up from 10 years ago and getting people fired? Who's burning books? Who's banning speech? Who is this party that people are afraid of? You're afraid of the far left. And I'm sorry if you're a leftist watching this, but let's be honest. We got to be honest. We got to have an honest conversation about this. There's a political leaning group of people in this country who's afraid of speaking their political views, it's Trump supporters. It's the right. It's hard to be anti-Black Lives Matter. It's hard to have a rational conversation about systemic racism with people on the left. It's hard to say, I don't believe that that's the case, or I have an opinion that varies from yours, because you get shouted down. We've seen people get fired. We've seen companies change logos. The far left and their ability to organize and their ability to petition through social media to make change, to get people fired, to have people blacklisted is incredibly powerful. So when 62% of Americans say that they are afraid to share their political opinion, you have to assume that that's people on the right. Donald Trump's not an idiot. No matter what people try and say, no matter what the left tries to cast him as, this is not a dumb person. This is a very intelligent person. This is a person who knows how to play the media and knows how to play the public. And so the interesting thing for me is that maybe Trump already knows this. Maybe Trump already understands that a lot of his supporters are afraid to actually voice their support for him. And as a result, he's actually putting the left into a position where they are eliminating any doubt on the outcome of the election, where they are absolutely saying the election's fine, there's going to be integrity, we're going to be okay. Donald Trump, knowing that in the era of COVID-19, mail-in voting is almost certainly going to have to be on the table. It's almost certainly going to be the case that the federal government can't tell the states how to run their elections. So he knows this is going to happen, and he's forcing the Democrats to say in advance that the election results are the election results, because he knows he's going to win. He knows the polls aren't right. He knows that his supporters are being silenced, and what he wants is the Democrats to put themselves in a position where they don't have the ability or any moral high ground to come back and say there was election fraud. You are getting the election that you wanted. He already knows they're going to get it. He's confident he's going to win, and he's putting them in a position where they aren't going to be able to challenge the results. To me, that just makes the most sense. When I look at what's going on in the country, when I look at who's afraid to actually speak up, it is the right. Donald Trump has every reason to believe that the polls are wrong. The polls were wrong last time. Now, the margin was a lot tighter last time, but the polls were wrong last time. And if the Democrats want mail-in voting, I don't think he's concerned about that. I think that if you look at this from another perspective and you look at what's going on with Black Lives Matter, and you look what's going on in these major cities, and you look at suburban families, they don't want that in their home. They don't want that in the street next to them. They want that kept in the city. And I think that when you look at the battlegrounds in this country, the major metropolitan areas go Democrat, the rural communities go Republican, and the battleground is the suburbs. And I think people who just want to be left alone, and people who live out in the suburbs and don't go into the city and aren't heavily involved in all of this stuff and just want the country to get back to normal, are going to vote for Donald Trump. And I think that he knows that. So I really do. I am predicting a landslide victory for Donald Trump. I don't think this is going to be as close as it was before, but in a tight race, if Donald Trump wins with mail-in voting in a tight race, he's really putting the Democrats in a position where they're not going to be able to challenge the results. And I think that's a genius move. He's also putting himself in a position where he's casting doubt if there is mail-in fraud or mail-in voting fraud. He's putting himself in a position, he's letting it be known that, hey, I'm going to put up a fight if I think there is fraud. He's in a position where it's okay for him to attack close results, and the Democrats are in a position where they can't, because like I said, they're going to get their mail-in voting. So that's kind of what's going on right now. It's a major conversation. I have a great deal of fear for the nation when it comes to a contested race where Biden and Trump neither concede the race, and this has to go to court, and we can have a protracted, long drawn out process where we're waiting for votes to come in, where votes are being cast aside. So I really think this is a major concern. It's definitely something worth keeping an eye on. So I wanted to get this video out. I wanted to discuss it. Tomorrow, I am going to be talking about the George Floyd body cam that was released, that's been leaked, that casts a little bit of doubt on the George Floyd scenario. I think that's going to be a major topic of conversation for the next couple of days. I'm going to go and review the body cam footage myself. So I do hope you tune in tomorrow. Turn on those notifications. Subscribe if you haven't done so, so you don't miss an episode. And I appreciate you stopping by. And as always, we'll see you next time.